Tonight on Reporting Scotland, alleged victims of rape, domestic abuse and sexual assault should not have to appear in court, according to Scotland's top judge.
And you're actually shaking, or I felt in the witness box, I was physically shaking.
Also on the programme, Scotland becomes the first country in the world to impose minimum unit pricing. Concerns over the Scottish Government's £2 billion deal with councils to fund more nursery places. A reshuffle at Rangers. Manager Graham Murty is out at Ibrox. Could the former Liverpool and England captain Steven Gerrard be taking over? And the biggest cruise ship to call at a Scottish port arrives in the Highlands. Good evening. Scotland's most senior judge says alleged victims of rape, domestic abuse and sexual assault should no longer have to appear in court, but should be able to give filmed testimony instead. Lord Carloway was speaking exclusively to the BBC in the weeks before the Scottish Parliament considers changing how vulnerable witnesses are treated in court. However, opponents say such a move could affect the accused's right to a fair trial. Our correspondent Lucy Adams has the story.
My dad was a good gardener, so new start, new beginnings, something positive. I'm trying to take after him.
Catherine Coots is trying to move on with her life. She was raped in 2009 in Edinburgh's Greyfriars Kirkyard, but she had to relive the experience last year when she was finally called to give evidence in court.
All of a sudden, after all these years, it was like, here it was again, back at the front of my mind. And I would try night after night to remember, and nothing was coming back to me.
It took 7 years to get a DNA match and identify her attacker as Cy Sullivan. Catherine has waived her anonymity to speak to us because she says she no longer wishes to feel ashamed. She wants other victims to come forward, but admits testifying in court is frightening.
It was very intimidating, I would say. You psych yourself up, I think, and get yourself in an awful state sort of before it. That's what I did. And you're actually shaking, or I felt in the witness box, I was physically shaking.
Scotland's most senior judge thinks victims of sexual assault like Catherine shouldn't have to attend court.
Cross-examination can sometimes make interesting drama on television. That is certainly true. On the other hand, studies have shown that in the type of category of case that we're looking at here, sexual crime, etc., of one sort or another, the traditional mode of cross-examination is particularly ineffective at getting to the truth of the matter.
3 years ago, Lord Carloway was tasked with looking at better ways of gathering evidence from children and vulnerable witnesses.
We have the ability to record what people do remember at or about the time of the event. So it's somewhat strange that we're depending so heavily on what they're being asked in a courtroom months and in some cases years later.
He wants cross-examination to take place well before the trial, with the questions and duration controlled by a judge.
There is no right to cross-examine in the way that people traditionally think it is done under the European Convention. There is an opportunity to examine other people's witnesses. But that does not involve a right to bully, harass or intimidate witnesses. And that's what we're seeking to address.
It's an idea welcomed by campaigners who say the system still fails victims.
We've seen recently an Inspector of Prosecution report where rape complainants were saying the experience of giving evidence in court is worse than being raped. Someone else said it was the most terrifying and degrading experience of their life. And this is someone who's been raped, saying that this is how bad the court process was. I just do not think it's acceptable to traumatise rape complainers in the way that we currently do.
But some defence lawyers fear it could compromise fair trials.
It's no use to me if a witness breaks down during my cross-examination. It just makes me look like a bad guy, and it perhaps adds credibility to the witness. So everyone's interest is to get as civilised as possible, as consistent with a fair trial, because that is a hallmark of civilization too, is a fair trial for an accused, not a presumption that because someone makes an allegation of sexual assault or rape, They are therefore almost presumed to be telling the truth, and let's not cause any difficulties and make it as easy as possible for that allegation to be in front of a jury.
Lord Carloway says our courts are stuck in Victorian times and need to adapt. Under his proposals, many victims and witnesses would no longer have to stand here to give their evidence. Instead, pre-filmed testimony and cross-examination would be played out to the jury. Lord Carloway's proposals would require a huge cultural change and a massive evidence vault. He thinks such reforms are more likely to start with children, but it's up to ministers to decide. A draft bill will be published in June, which could close the door on centuries of tradition. Lucy Adams, reporting Scotland.
It's taken almost 10 years, but from today, it's an offence to sell alcohol below a minimum unit price of 50p. Scotland becomes the first country in the world to impose this, which is aimed at reducing the harm alcohol causes. It means that an average 2-litre bottle of strong cider, which could have been bought for as little as £2.50, will now cost at least £7.50. While own brand vodka, gin and whisky will rise in price by as much as £3 a bottle, as will some cheap wines and multi-pack beers. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Reba Alderson.
Preparing to reprice booze. Minimum unit pricing means cheap alcohol from today is no longer so cheap. The policy is designed to reduce the harm alcohol can do.
Last year I was taken into hospital and I had I suffered from alcohol-related brain damage, the early stages of. I'd lost my short-term memory, my coordination from my thinking and my talking was a bit messed up.
Audrey says she's now getting better. At the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, the First Minister visited the liver ward to meet staff in the front line.
If you're drinking too much, think about the liver, and if you find somebody's liver disease, think about what's they're drinking.
One of Scotland's leading liver transplant surgeons says on the ward, the fight is to salvage patients.
When your liver fails, many other organs fail too, and so you have to deal with internal bleeding or fluid retention or kidney failure or coma. Sometimes our patients are in intensive care, so we support those, sometimes with drugs, sometimes with organ support systems.
Half the battle is just getting to the point where you feel as if you want to do that.
Nicola Sturgeon was Health Minister when minimum unit pricing was first proposed. After 9 years battling in Holyrood and the courts, a policy which she insists is vital has finally happened.
Yesterday in Scotland you could buy the maximum recommended alcohol intake for around £2.50. Now that can't be right. So what this does by making alcohol and the cheapest, highest strength alcohol less affordable, it helps to reduce some of the damage and consumption.
But there's a note of caution. Some charities which support the new laws say minimum pricing could disproportionately hit low-income families and cause problems.
We have spoken to a lot of families and they've expressed concerns about how it's going to impact on the income for the house. It is a lot in terms of increase financially for families, but we would hope that that would start an open dialogue in and amongst the family about changes that need to be made, and we can support families to bring about those conversations that are required.
The government's next public target in its battle against alcohol harm is likely to be drink advertising in open spaces, including on buses and trains, in stadiums and parks.
Well, Revel is here. Revel, this is still quite a controversial issue. When and how will we know if minimum pricing is having any effect on health?
Well, it's obviously going to take some time for the figures to be compiled, but there is a huge amount of evidence gathered by Sheffield University and others, which suggested that this price of 50p minimum would be a very good price to reduce harm caused by alcohol in a number of ways. When will we actually get to review it? Well, there is a sunset clause in the legislation. That means to say that this legislation will fall in 6 years' time unless MSPs renew it. That means in 5 years' time they'll have a review debate and they'll have to make sure that it is renewed. Of course, we don't know whether 50p is going to remain the figure. The Welsh Assembly is currently considering minimum unit pricing, and they're looking possibly at a 60p minimum unit. So the Scottish Government could increase it. They said they didn't want to because of all of the legal problems that they'd been facing over the past few years. But It looks as if it is the sort of thing that many governments are looking at now. The Irish government are looking at it, the Northern Territories in Australia are looking at it, and it's been used in some sort of form in parts of Canada as well. So this is absolutely the way forward from a public health point of view, according to the Scottish Government.
Revel, thank you. Concerns are being raised about the Scottish Government's deal with councils to fund more nursery places. Ministers have promised more free nursery places to 3- and 4-year-olds, costing taxpayers almost £2 billion over 5 years. Maura Kinneborough can tell us more.
I'll give you some.
Learning through play. Nursery provision's a key Scottish Government pledge. But its plans to expand early learning were criticised. Watchdog Audit Scotland warned the figures didn't add up.
What will you put in your sandpie? How do you make it? A chocolate sandpie. Oh!
Scottish Government and councils have agreed a deal to fund more free nursery hours.
We'll be saving money for every family in the land, so we calculate about £4,500 per child, per family. That's a huge sum of money for working parents.
But some parents are concerned more nursery hours may not cover work hours. There aren't enough spaces, children may be forced into formal learning too soon.
I work 8 hours a week, one day, and you think that this would be brilliant for parents like me. Unfortunately, it's not. They haven't thought it through properly. They haven't provided the places.
It's great to have more hours for childcare, definitely. The only thing is, it shouldn't be compulsory.
Councils argue it's a groundbreaking move. 100 new nurseries will be built, 11,000 staff may be needed.
Not every child before now has been able to go to nursery, and I think it's very significant that every 3- and 4-year-old is now offered that opportunity, or will be over the next 2 or 3 years.
I'm stuck too.
The scheme aims to close the attainment gap and give more families free childcare, but analysts are worried.
Delighted that something's happening. I have a major concern about whether the projection of what is needed will actually be what emerges when we have this available, and whether or not parents will be able to fit in with the facilities that are made available to them.
While critics are concerned, local and national government are convinced it'll transform the life chances of children in Scotland. Maura Kinneborough, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Police say they are increasingly concerned about a woman missing since leaving a nightclub in Dundee at the weekend. 28-year-old Victoria Ferrier, who's from the city, was last seen leaving the Club Tropicana nightclub in South Ward Street at about 1:30 on Saturday morning. She was wearing a pink, black and white striped blouse and white shorts. Rangers have sacked manager Graham Murty with just 3 games left this season. It follows 2 heavy defeats to Celtic and comes with the Ibrox club in talks with the former Liverpool and England captain Steven Gerrard about becoming their next manager. Here's our senior football reporter, Chris McLaughlin.
The Rangers players leaving training earlier. They'd just been informed the man who came in to cover for the man who was sacked had, well, just been sacked. Relieved of his duties, the club added, Graham has had to contend with difficult and challenging circumstances, but conducted himself in a thoroughly professional manner. He will take some time to consider his options, which include returning to his role at the Rangers Academy.
Here goes Forrest, powering his way through!
This was one of the final nails in his managerial coffin. A 5-0 defeat to Celtic at the weekend. The Rangers fans' faces said it all. It was a meteoric rise and fall. Graham Murty joined as head of development in 2016. In February last year, he was asked to step in after Mark Warburton left, claiming he'd been dismissed. 8 months later, another manager was gone, Pedro Caixinha, sacked. Again, the club called on Murty. In December, after some favourable results, he was told he was the man until the end of the season. Today, he was told he wasn't.
3 managers in 3 years has probably shown that it hasn't worked. It's been a costly exercise as well on the back of Pedro Caixinha, and it just looks as if it was probably too soon for Graham. You know, it looked as if he was a man exasperated with what was going on round about him.
This is who they want to replace him. But Murty himself was frustrated. News of the interest in Steven Gerrard came just before the Celtic match.
Murty is a kind of caretaker, end of the season arrangement. But it felt like Rangers were writing off this season as early as October. I mean, I don't understand why they haven't been able to go and find a manager
The fans can't understand either. Once again, they have to watch on, wonder and hope that this time it might get better. It won't be under this man though. Murty has gone, but who will be next?
Well, let's go to Ibrox. And Chris, you mentioned Steven Gerrard. What's the latest on that, Chris?
Well, Jackie, reports this evening that Gerrard has signed a 3-year contract with Rangers. A club source has told me in the past half hour that that is not the case and that negotiations with the former Liverpool and England captain remain ongoing. He is very much the man they want. The job is his if he wants it. I understand he's heading out of the country for a couple of days, but it seems we may well get some news one way or the other by the end of this week.
Thank you very much. Well, it's 17 minutes to 7. A reminder now of tonight's main story. Alleged victims of rape, domestic abuse and sexual assault should not have to appear in court but be able to give filmed evidence instead, according to Scotland's top judge. And still to come, the Stars and Stripes, made for the funerals of American soldiers killed off Islay, returned to the island to mark the centenary. Scotland's Justice Secretary has admitted he had no knowledge of a controversial report into Police Scotland until the BBC shared the information ahead of a documentary. Opposition politicians said it was a scandal that it appears that a former Chief Constable covered up allegations of corruption and criticism of the force made in an internal report. Our political correspondent Andrew Kerr has more.
The BBC Scotland documentary laid bare the allegations against Police Scotland last night. In the early days of the force, this report was compiled, detailing corruption complaints and criticism of senior officers. These comments did not appear in the final report, and a section describing a culture of fear was also removed. Sir Stephen House was the Chief Constable at the time. He's declined to comment. At Holyrood, opposition politicians pressed the Justice Secretary on the subject.
This is a scandal, and I do not use that word lightly. It appears that the head of our national police force has engaged in a deliberate cover-up of allegations of corruption and changed the tenses of other problems to suggest they were already fixed.
When did he first become aware of this? Was it before last night? And if so, why has he not brought this before Parliament before now?
The Justice Secretary said he had no knowledge of the report.
Presiding Officer, the nature of the report which the BBC published in this matter was brought to my attention when they published information relating to their programme. It is a report that I do think Police Scotland at that time should have shared with the Scottish Police Authority. So the Scottish Police Authority had an opportunity to look at these issues, and I think it's been a mistake on their part not to do so.
Meanwhile, new figures today revealed the number of police officers in Scotland is at its lowest level for 9 years. Fresh concerns were also raised about the merger of the British Transport Police with Police Scotland. The Justice Secretary was trying to concentrate on the future, but perhaps the past and present problems of Police Scotland are hard to escape. Andrew Kerr, reporting Scotland, Holyrood.
One of the biggest cruise ships in the world has docked at Invergordon on the Cromarty Firth. The MSC Meraviglia is on her maiden visit to Scotland, bringing more than 4,500 passengers, which incidentally dwarfs Invergordon's entire population. Well, our reporter Ian McInnes is on the quayside for us tonight. Ian.
Well, Jackie, it's been quite a day here in Invergordon with the huge MSC Meraviglia docking here today. It's now getting ready to depart, bound for Orkney this evening. She'll then head for Greenock and on then to Dublin. But her passengers today have been enjoying the opportunity to explore across the Highlands. We got a chance to have a look on board, but we've also been finding out how Invergordon itself is coping after its population was more than doubled today. Through the morning haze, her size became apparent. All 19 decks in full glory. And despite that, she can turn on a sixpence. The MSC Meraviglia is now the 5th largest cruise ship in the world, but they're constantly growing, and more are visiting the Highlands.
I think there are certain places in the world that are perfect to explore via the sea, and I think the Highlands and Northern Europe is one of those places. A cruise is an introduction to a place that you might never have even thought of visiting, and you might get a lot of people who will say, actually, I want to invest now in doing a full holiday in the Highlands.
On board, everything you'd expect and more from a ship that's less than a year old. And passengers were even treated to some Highland sun today. And it's a big year for the Cromarty Firth. 40 years since the first cruise liner visited the port. But it's not just here in Invergordon where the benefit's been felt. There's an impact of the tourism across the whole of the Highlands. More than 70 buses ferried passengers throughout the region, from distilleries and castles to, well, you know who.
Nessie last year?
Glenmorangie. Did you see any monsters?
No, yeah, plastic monster.
I saw the monster. It was terrible.
But for all the monster hunters, there's those who choose to stay in Invergordon's own high street.
When you've got a large ship like you've got today, you do see quite a lot that are not willing to go away on tours. And when they go away, they always come back at some point in the day. It's up for you to get them into the shop and get them to buy.
But it's buy for the ship owners as the boats get bigger and bigger.
There's 95 ships on order at the moment, so who knows where it'll stop. Well, obviously we're restricted to a certain size of cruise ship. The port is a trust port, so therefore they have to look at the future-proof the port and make sure that we can accommodate these new, bigger and better ships that are coming out.
And already the bookings are in for 2020, with the size of ships bound to increase. The ports will have to do likewise. Ian McInnes, reporting Scotland in Invergordon.
And now to something pretty tiny. Noah Connell, there he is. He was born with a rare condition, which meant his jaw hadn't formed properly. It could have stopped him breathing. But thanks to surgeons in Glasgow performing a UK first on someone with his condition, Noah is about to celebrate his first birthday. His parents have been telling us about a difficult 12 months.
So this is Noah. He's 11 months old. He's very complex. He was born with a tiny jaw, and his airway was obstructing. He's got a floppy airway and a left-sided anatomy that's weaker than the right.
He's had his jaw moved forward and then pushed up, and he's had these pins put in. He's the first person in the UK to ever have this done. We had asked because obviously we were curious to what the name was, because we had known it was a mandibular jaw distraction he had before, and he just explained to us, listen, there's no name for it. And then we asked for a picture. He said there's no pictures. You won't find a picture anywhere. It's
exactly scaffolding, that's the best way they could describe it. So this part's right into Noah's skull. You can see his wee scars. That's the only place they could get it in. This bit here is to keep the jaw open at the top, and this bit here is to keep it open at the bottom. When we seen him, I think it was a shock. We didn't think it would have been that many pins. We didn't think his scars would be that prominent.
We tried to keep her calm during it, because if we panicked, then it would basically make him panic a bit more, because obviously we're stressing about him. I'm really happy with the result. It was absolutely terrific what they've done.
It's a big milestone. We didn't think he was going to make it. Our first birthday is big, but for us it's that wee bit bigger. Because the fact we didn't know if Noah was going to make it to his first birthday. There's been times where it's been testing, there's been times where I've had a phone call to say Noah might not make it. He come up to the hospital. When he's going for operations, we've just been an emotional wreck, but we always pull together for Noah.
I'll tell you something, I wouldn't be able to go through anything he's been through and still be happy, smiling like he is. We couldn't believe it when he came out of his operation, because we didn't think he'd be able to even try and smile, yet he was still putting a smile on his face.
A flag made for the funerals of American soldiers killed when their troop ship was torpedoed off Islay 100 years ago is returning to the island. The homemade Stars and Stripes is being loaned from a US museum to help mark the centenary. Here's Glenn Campbell.
At events marking the centenary of the Tuscania's sinking, the US flag has pride of place. But there wasn't one to be found on Islay when the ship went down. The SS Tuscania was torpedoed near the island in February 1918 with the loss of 200, mostly American men, including some who thought they'd escaped.
So those who made it into lifeboats were swept towards this rugged coastline, and when they reached the shore, many were shipwrecked for a second time.
Arthur Siplin was rescued by a farmer when his lifeboat capsized, but he never forgot those who perished.
They were his friends, the soldiers that he had trained with, and so it impacted him really deeply.
Private Siplin attended the mass funerals of his comrades, hastily organised by islanders.
there wasn't a cemetery, and they created one. And they had to bury this overwhelming number of young American boys. And when they did have the service, they realized that there wasn't an American flag to fly over the graves of these soldiers. And they didn't seem right.
So this small group of islanders decided to make their own stars and stripes and stayed up into the night to finish it. For the past 100 years, that flag and the story of its makers has been carefully preserved in an American museum.
The fact that they so lovingly cared for the soldiers and cared to make sure that they were had the proper burial and had the proper flag in order to be buried under that flag shows that it was very heartfelt, that people went out of their way to respect those who had just recently lost their lives.
Now the Tuscania flag is coming home on loan to the Museum of Islay Life for the centenary.
It feels right, it feels appropriate, and I think it also shows a respect from America back to Islay to say thank you for what you did for our men 100 years ago.
Americans and islanders came together for a local memorial service in February, and they'll do so again on Friday at an international commemoration. Glenn Campbell reporting Scotland, Islay.
And you can see more from Glenn on how Islay coped with 2 troop ship disasters during the First World War in a few minutes' time on this channel. Well, let's get the weather now from Christopher.
Jackie, thank you. Hello there. 1st of May, it started off bright and sunny for many of us. Unfortunately, the blue skies didn't last. If we take a look at the satellite and radar picture, you can see this weather system moving its way in across the country through the course of the day. So increasingly cloudy, wet, quite windy, and the blue skies replaced with grey ones. But lovely pictures from our weather watchers nonetheless. Now, through the course of this evening and overnight, the cloudy, wet and windy weather continues to work its way eastwards out towards the North Sea, and we'll start to see something drier and clearer, pushing in towards the Highlands and Islands, perhaps down towards Argyll, Glasgow as well. 4 or 5 Celsius here, further east, with the cloud holding on. Not quite that chilly and certainly nowhere near as cold as last night. Tomorrow, there's that weather front just edging its way out in towards the North Sea, so it will improve, certainly across eastern Scotland after a fairly cloudy and damp morning, but you'll notice through the course of the day that system pulls away. Elsewhere, it's reasonably bright, some sunshine, but equally there'll be a number of showers too. So, mid-afternoon, 4 o'clock, sunshine and showers sums it up fairly nicely. It will be rather cool though at times, temperatures 10 to 12 Celsius. And some of those showers heavy, perhaps some hail, the odd rumble of thunder in the mix. But out with the showers, in the sun, out of the wind, it should feel okay. I think probably staying somewhat cloudy for Orkney and perhaps cloudy and damp for Shetland, not really improving here until dusk. Rest of the afternoon into the evening and little in the way of change, some late brightness, the showers easing off. Looking ahead, this is Thursday. Reasonably dry, fairly cloudy though, and some light rain or drizzle at times in the west. But look at the temperatures starting to creep up, 13, 14 Celsius, a breeze coming in from the southwest, best of the sunshine in the northeast. And that trend for temperatures to rise is with us through Friday and indeed the weekend, with milder air moving in from the Atlantic, but also a fair amount of cloud too. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. Scotland's most senior judge says alleged victims of rape, domestic abuse and sexual assault should no longer have to appear in court, but should be able to give filmed testimony instead. Laura Calloway was speaking as the Scottish Parliament prepares to consider changing how vulnerable witnesses are treated in court. We'll be back at 10:30. Until then, from all the team, for now, good evening.